Hello and welcome to Plot Twisters.
This is a podcast where we take movies and twist the plot to see if we can make them better. And if not, some great podcast content.
Today we want to share a bit about our process whilst making Plot Twisters with you.
On this episode, recording, editing, and publishing a podcast, the Plot Twisters way.
Hi listeners.
Hello.
We're doing something fun and unusual today.
We're doing something. Hey, guess what? What movie are we talking about today?
No movie.
No movie.
Nothing.
Not even one darn.
I feel kind of lost.
film.
I feel kind of lost.
I just opened IMDb and I'm just like on the front page
God.
and I don't know what to look
do?
up. What? I don't even have a quote. It's very confusing. This is Emma, by the way. Hello. Hi, Emma.
Hi.
Welcome to the podcast.
The other guy is Anders. And we are the co-hosts of the Plot Twisters podcast. We watch films from the past and we kind of twist them around and make something new out of them and use our very silly brains to come up with new versions of stuff. And today we wanted to talk a bit about the creative and technical process that we've been through to make our podcast, because we want to help other people make their own content. Because we love podcasts and we want everyone else to be involved with podcasts and listen to them and make them.
I love podcasts so much. I'm a real podcast.
You're kind of you're much more of the podcast guy than I. You are the podcast guy.
I'm a big deal. People see me on the street and they're like, whoa, that's that guy who likes pod. I don't want to brag, man, but my phone one time, which has a lot of storage, was completely full. And I was like, why is my phone full? It's because I had like 90 gigs of podcasts on my phone. I know. I'm only one person, but I was hoarding all of them. I've deleted them all and freed them to the world. But yeah, I love podcasts.
You love podcasts, yeah.
That's why I wanted to make one.
I also love podcasts, but I wouldn't say quite as much as you do. But what would you say your favorite thing is about podcasts?
Okay, so the thing that I love about podcasts is that you can't see the thing, right? And I love
That's
that.
True, you can't see the thing
because you can't see the thing. I love podcasts because they are wonderfully honest, often, and quite beautiful and interesting conversations between 1, 2, 3, or sometimes a group of people. And I love that they do things that you just wouldn't do in a filmed thing. It's a bit more freeform. It's a bit more honest. It's a bit more casual. And also, I do public transport and I need content.
Yeah. And
I don't want to brag, but I get car sick, so I can't read books or whatever. So I love podcasts because I can just close my eyes and imagine what's going on. That's why people like podcasts, right? Because I got to get from point A to point B, and I don't want to be boring. So I want to listen to some chuckleheads talk about a movie from a different time. Right?
Yeah.
Isn't that right? What do you love about podcasts? Why are you a podcast person?
I listen to podcasts a lot when I'm doing something else. So I'm quite into art and design, and so I'll quite often be listening to podcasts while I'm drawing on stuff. I think for me it's really the sense of community and companionship. Like a lot of the podcasts I listen to, I feel very invested in the podcasters, and so having a good dynamic and a good connection with those people is a really important part to me. I'd say more important than the content I'm learning or listening to. I will listen to something I'm not super interested in as long as the people who are talking about it are really interested into it and really engaging, So that's a big thing for me with podcasts, I think.
Sometimes for me with podcasts, I don't want to know what the people who are talking look like. So intentionally not Google them, you know? Have you ever actually Googled people that have podcast people and you look at their faces and you go,
what?
Oh,
it's like when you read a book and then you
like.
see the movie of the book and you realize that they cast it wrong because the person in your head was different.
You've done messed this up, It's like, and that thing where if you were to meet one of your podcast heroes, and I hope one day that we do, you wouldn't necessarily recognize them until they opened up their mouth and you'd be like, oh my gosh, that's Jesse Thorne, for example.
Yeah.
But I don't know what he looks like.
No.
Oh
yeah, no.
And I don't want to know. Don't want to know.
So we both love podcasts and we've had so much fun making this together. It's been
Mm-hmm.
It's two
awesome.
years now.
2 years of fun.
2 years of
2
fun.
years.
We've worked like together on basically every element of it as well. Like, and we have done all of it ourselves. Like, there isn't anything that we've outsourced. Not to say there's anything wrong with outsourcing stuff, but I think we're probably quite good people to talk about if you do want to do everything yourself, because that's what we've done. I would say, like, if you are thinking about making your own podcast, hopefully there'll be some stuff in here that's interesting and useful to you. It is very much the specific process that we went through, and obviously that may look different for everyone, but you know, we want to help. And I think also there are a lot of challenges that come with podcasting. It can be difficult. Any kind of creative process can be difficult. So even, getting through that first stage of deciding you want to do it is important.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, hey, look, it's no secret. I think we've said this on the podcast before. Maybe we haven't. You and I have been we've been talking about making a podcast for a lot longer than we have been making a podcast.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
We've known each other for years, and there's always that thing where like, we should make a podcast about this, And we'll get to it in a second. I think we'll talk about like forming the idea of a podcast. But like, I remember for me, like, I've pitched probably a dozen podcasts, not just to you, but to other people in my head. I'm like, that might be a good idea. But we've never like really dug into a concept enough to get it off the ground.
Yeah.
And so, I guess in my experience, wanting to make a podcast and deciding to actually make the podcast are so far apart. It's like New Jersey and Los Angeles. You know what I mean? Like, it's one thing and it's another thing.
Yeah,
if you will. Absolutely.
And then once you have got it, creating something that keeps going is also really tough. Like coming up with something that you are going to talk about every week, and you're going to have stuff to talk about every week. That's also tough. Like, I think you have to find something that you feel like you have enough to say. I mean, unless you wanted to do a short form series, but if you want to do something weekly, it's got to be something you're really passionate about. Because otherwise you just run out of stuff to say.
You just run out of steam.
Yeah.
Run out of steam.
So we're going to be talking about how we came up with the idea of our podcast and kind of turn that into like a format. We're going to talk about our process of recording and editing and uploading, so some technical stuff as well. Because there's lots of info out there, but there's lots of stuff that's difficult to fish through sometimes. Yeah. And then also things like our kind of our brand and how we came up with that. And just some, I guess, stories from our experience of doing it and what that's been like. So should we get into it?
Let's get right into it. The idea. So yeah, we've talked about making a podcast for a long time, but how did we go from we should maybe make a podcast lols to we are making a podcast? What happened? What was the story? What's our origin story?
So the story was that we it was during the lockdown of the global coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah. Panny Dem. I remember that.
You remember. And I think both of us were like wanted to fuel some kind of actual creation. We both wanted to make something at the same time. I feel like I remember both of us were making lots of stuff at the time, and it was like, let's make a thing.
Yeah. Let's make a thing. Let's make a thing.
And I was watching a Disney film. I can't remember which one it was. And I said something to you like, oh, I'm watching this. I think it was like The Little Mermaid or something. And I was like, this is so bad. This is so problematic. And you said, oh, what if we did a podcast where we talked about Disney films and like what's going on with them? And I was like, oh, yeah, maybe. I don't know. I feel like that's probably been done.
Sure.
And then you, for some reason, I don't know why.
It's because I got Disney Plus.
Is it? It is because of Disney Plus,
because
right?
you were talking about Disney Plus, and we were like, maybe we'll get Disney Plus because we were like, maybe we'll watch all the Marvel movies, and that's the thing we'll do, and make banana bread, and and clap for the NHS, and worry about the pandemic, right? So we got Disney Plus, and instead of watching all the Marvel movies, I watched Never Been Kissed.
You watched Never Been Kissed
from the 90s. Because I was like, oh yeah, remember Drew Barrymore?
Yeah.
And something was awoken in me, and so I texted you and said you should watch Never Been Kissed.
Yes.
because it's funny and stupid.
And I think you also like you wanted my opinion on how it's aged, because that's like I guess something that I've been able to bring to your life is like socially aware critique of things that you love.
Sure.
And so you said we should do a podcast, and I was just like, cool, let's do it. And then I to be honest with you, I can't even really remember the specifics of how that suddenly went from let's do it to us sitting in separate rooms in separate houses.
What happened was I said we should do a podcast, and it'll be movies that I loved when I was in high school, and I'll make you watch them, and then you can tell me whether or not you think they're bad or good or if they've aged well. And then you said, yeah, maybe that's a good idea. And then I went, oh, okay, maybe we'll do this. And then later we kept texting each other about it. And I think it was one of those things where it's like, at first we're like, is this really going to happen?
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's going to happen. And then, yeah, right. And then it just sort of like escalated that way.
And I remember feeling quite nervous because I thought that one of us would back out or something, and we'd be like,
Wait, exactly.
Wait, are we doing this?
But neither of us are people that back out of things,
no.
Or at least initially. And so that sort of happened. And then I remember you texted me and said, well, we need to have a planning meeting. And I went like, this is really happening.
Yeah.
And so we did like a whole call where we talked about what do we want the podcast to be, and how will it flow, and will we have features, and will there be, all that stuff. And we sort of fleshed out what we thought the podcast would be. And then we did a test episode where we tried it, right?
We just did it, and I think we talked for like 2 hours.
Yeah. Yes. And for a long time, this is fun. I don't know if this is part of the this is maybe part of more of like how do we finesse the idea, but like we never done it before, so we just decided let's try it. And then for a long time, I think we got not hung up on, but we were really conscious of trying to like have segments of the podcast, and so we used to fill out this like really amazing worksheet that you created, right?
And like our talking points and stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it was just a way of being like, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to talk about? When are we going to talk about it within the podcast? And like you even had space for like the main characters and their names and all that stuff,
which we've never done.
Which we've never done.
Names. We tried,
but I remember that for me was really helpful because like I could easily sit down. I don't want to brag, but like one of the things that I can do as a human being, which is a curse as much as it is a blessing, is if you could just put me down in front of any old person and I could talk to them for an hour about anything, right? But the sheet helped like just finagle it through squish it through sort of a path so that we didn't just spend 45 minutes talking about one scene or whatever, but we tried to like say what we wanted to say. It's nice to know that, not too long into the podcast, we use the sheet less and less and less, and then eventually we don't do that at all. Or you don't still use it?
No, I know,
right?
Yeah, I barely even remember to write down a quote half the time. But I do think a big part of that, and I would say like this is probably specific to people who are trying to make a podcast with someone else, but you do have to learn like the working style of the other person as much as you do as you have to find out your own. Like I think certainly for me, I've always been somebody who I really like to prepare a lot for whatever it is I'm going to do, and if I don't feel like I've adequately prepared, then I feel stressed and I feel I don't feel ready to do it. So certainly for me it was quite scary going into it whilst feeling like I was like, I don't really feel like I know what I'm doing, and I feel like I should know what I'm doing. So for me, a lot of the process is kind of letting go of like, I'm a huge perfectionist, and just kind of letting go of that need to feel like I know exactly what I'm doing and that everything's working. And I think definitely for us actually, so much of the eventual format is very reliant on just like who we are as people, which is that like you do your thing of, I watched this when I was a kid and now it's changed, and I do my thing of going, this isn't feminist, and then we do like our jokes together, and that's not a format that we could have just kind of pulled out of thin air. It's one that we had to find by just doing it again and again with each other, and starting with that preparation and feeling like, you know, why did we try and get this so it's a good it's a good listen and there's good content in there.
Sure.
But we have very much just kind of fallen into that rhythm, and that's what keeps it going.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, and you know, I mean, like, not to make this too much about our podcast, which it is, but like, you know, it isn't. I do wonder. I can't wait until next season when we flip that.
Yeah.
When it's going to be, we're going to talk about movies that you liked when you were in high school and I've never seen before. What maybe people don't, I mean, I'm sure they know because if they've listened, like, they get it. Like, we've watched almost 90 movies, and almost 90 of them are movies that you've never seen, and almost all of them are movies that I've seen so many times that I didn't technically have to watch them for the podcast, but I have, you know, to refresh them. It's been it's been so awesome just going back and seeing all of these films that either were and still are formative, or were and now aren't, and regrettably, you know, so movies from growing up, it's been a real trip. And like the whole journey of the podcast, us evolving what we do and how we do it, and, you know, getting better at like just doing it, that's been really exciting. Whilst at the same time, every single week I just look at the calendar and go, yes, we get to watch this movie, I can't wait.
Yeah,
you know, it's great.
And I think from being a podcast listener, I know that having a format and having a familiarity to a podcast is so important. And a lot of the podcasts that I really like have a very specific format, and they have a very specific intro, and they have a specific kind of outro. And so that it feels really comforting to listen to. So that's something that we definitely... I think we were really keen to bring into it as much as we could. Like, let's make sure we've got a good intro. Let's make sure we've got a good outro. Let's try and keep these familiar things in, so that because our podcast is about watching different films that listeners may not have seen, they have got that sense of familiarity. And we also, within the world of our podcast, we talk about like, oh, these are our friends that we know. This is like actors that we like, and this is our wheelhouse, and this is our comfort zone. And we are always trying to bring people in and make them feel included in that little world that we've created. And I think that's something that's so important to me in podcasts that I like, and in our podcast.
I agree.
And so, that's something that's super important. But in terms of choosing it, I think it's really difficult, and it's really dependent on your content. But I think what we have done very successfully is we have played to our strengths, and we have found the things that really work for us and that work for us together, and that's what we've made our podcast about, which is why I think it will keep going. I hope it will keep going. What? Because at the end of the day, we're two people who like talking to each other about movies, and that's not going to change.
You know, the other thing I was going to say too, like, so if you listen to, say, the episode that we just recorded, which I can't remember, what did we just record?
Last
Starfighter. Earth Girls Are Easy or whatever, right? If you listen to episode 86 and then you go back and listen to episode 2, you will hear a very different podcast, but like with a lot of similarities, but like we definitely, things have changed a lot. And I often people are like, when people go, hey, I heard you have a podcast, should I listen to your podcast? You know, I'm often this might come into a later section, but I have a listing of like a clutch of podcast episodes that I will recommend to people, because my big fear is they're gonna go like listen to episode 1 and then go, yeah, you know, it's good. And I'm going to be like, caveat. That was the first thing we did. It was 2.5 years ago, right? Things have changed a bit, you know. But that's because when you start a podcast, and I just hope that you will, listener, the idea you have might start out in one way and might evolve over time, and that doesn't make it bad or good. It's just like a thing that happens, right? And so, you know, my advice would be, don't be afraid to keep evolving the format and asking yourself whether or not it's still working, you know, and asking for feedback, but equally like saying to people, or at least to yourself, I hear you, but I don't care because I'm going to keep doing it my way because I like it. I remember early on when a friend of mine was like, I really like your podcast, but like, you know, that bit where you do the twist. Have you ever thought about like, you know, figuring out what the twist would be first and writing it down before you do it, you know? And I was like, no, because the whole point is that we do it. It's improv. You can't write down improv. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I guess it's like you shouldn't wait to start making a podcast for your idea to be perfect, because you'll be you just start now and you'll be figuring it out for ages. And so much of that learning process will come as part of doing it. You've just got to, you know, and there'll be so many things that you can't predict that you need to learn how to do.
Yeah.
So just start now. Just
start now. Just start now. Should we talk about how to make a podcast?
Let's do it.
Recording.
So we use GarageBand to record on
GarageBand.
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 We use GarageBand. We record on laptops. Well, I record on a laptop. You have a fancy desktop computer.
27-inch iMac.
Yeah. And we have a nice little setup usually where we have the recording going on, and we usually use some sort of like note, like we have everything written down in a note to read.
Yeah.
And then we have like IMDb up usually as well, don't we?
Yeah, I guess it's important to say like it's actually simpler than you think, right? I know people do podcasts in real life. We've never done an episode in real life. I think it requires microphones that we don't have. Yeah. Although one day, you know, should. I keep trying to pitch that we should do it in the same room, but like, it's because the technology. We don't have the technology. We started doing this over FaceTime because it was the pandemic. I will actually say it's a really good format. We FaceTime each other. We both hit record on GarageBand. 2 separate tracks. We use Apple stuff, so we use iCloud Drive to store all of our stuff. You upload your track, I upload my track. That's where we keep all of the edits and all the like ready to go fully edited episodes. It's really not that hard once you get into the rhythm of editing. You don't have to be like a professional editor, but like a few tips in GarageBand is a good shout. I have a background in music and in editing, and so I've taken on the sort of the role of editing because I really wanted to do it, and because I like working in GarageBand. I find it really straightforward to take the 2 tracks, match them up. Often because of a little bit of audio bleed, to be honest. I can just hear your voice in the background of my track or my voice in the background of your track, and I just match them up. And once they're matched up, I spent a good amount of time watching YouTube videos because it's the 21st century, and if you want to learn how to do a thing, just look at it on YouTube around like setting using different not filters, but just like, you know, different techniques to get the best sound out of each of our voices, and to make each of them sound as rich as possible. So YouTube is definitely your friend. There's a few people out there that have posted some amazing videos of like, this is how you can get the best out of a voice. My other advice, I guess, if I'd give to anybody is like, podcast, man. Some podcasts out there, and no offense, right? If you're making a podcast and you're doing something that you love, well done. But like, some podcasts out there sound pretty bad, not very good, you know, audio wise. And to them, I would say this: even an entry level microphone, right, which will not cost you the world, and an entry level DI box or direct input box that you can plug that microphone into, that then plugs into your machine, is such a good investment, a small but important investment that will make your podcast sound good. This is an audio medium, okay? So the best microphone that you can afford, my advice would be buy it, because your voice will sound good and it will sound full. And when you edit it, you won't have to spend hours and hours trying to make something that didn't sound that good to begin with, to sound good. I remember the first album I ever recorded in a studio. The producer there said, "I've got an amazing mixing board, and I can basically make this thing sound any way you want it to, but I can't make bad musicians sound good." Right? He said, "Do it well, and then when we mix it, it will sound really good."
Yeah.
You know, and so definitely think about your microphone, think about pop screen, think about the room you're recording it in, think about background sounds, think about the headphones you're using and how much audio bleed you're going to get. I'm still astounded by the number of podcasts I hear where people are clearly just using the microphone from their, laptop or whatever, and they're not wearing headphones. So like there's all that bleed and stuff. What's your take on the sort of recording?
Yeah, I guess it's like, I suppose my perspective is that a lot of the time with the creative process, there are kind of blockers that prevent you from being creative. And I think that equipment can be a huge one of those. So I would say don't let a lack of equipment stop you from
for sure
being creative. However, if you do find that you have a great idea and it's something you really want to commit to, and I suppose that you really want to polish it and you really want it to be a good product, audio quality is a huge component of that, because so often people will make a judgment incredibly quickly about what you're making, and they'll listen to it, and if within 5 minutes, if that audio quality isn't there, they'll just not want to listen to what you have to say, and that's not good. But don't like. If you are finding that you are struggling to fulfill your creative dream because of a lack of equipment, then don't let that stop you. Just do what you need to do. But I would also say, from the editing perspective, so this is just from my perspective, like I found editing very difficult because, as I mentioned, I'm a perfectionist, and I really struggle with being very self-critical. So listening back to my own commentary and having to make judgments on it is not good for me, because I'll kind of jump to being way too critical on myself and be like, oh, why did I say that, and that was stupid, and get rid of that and delete that. So and I think that's definitely something that is, I suppose, a thing that you have to learn or work with if you are in a situation where you're editing something that you've made, where it's just you talking and it's just you sharing your ideas and kind of platforming what you have to say, and a lot of us do find that hard, and it's difficult to believe in yourself, and it's still difficult to know that what you have to say is useful and someone's going to like it. So I think what the fact that you like editing and wanted to do it is very good for both of us, because I think it was a bit tough for me. But I'm sure, I would have found a way to work with it otherwise if that wasn't the case. In terms of like the actual how we go about recording, we usually record in the evenings because we both work. But it's also like I think we discussed we wanted to have kind of like a nice relaxing evening feel, like two friends sitting around with a beer having a chat, so that fits quite nicely. We usually plan, like, we'll make sure that we can both watch the film that we want to talk about, and then I think we try and get one every week, or we sometimes do 2 a week.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much.
Or if we have to skip, then it's fine because we record a few episodes ahead. We always warm up as well. Like, we always have a chat first. It's like you don't want to just go straight into it because it's difficult to build rapport like out of nothing. And we also, I think you said, like, we use Apple stuff. We have a shared calendar where we just put in, like, when we're going to record. So I think planning the time is really, really important, particularly if you're working with someone else. Yeah. We're very lucky that we're both kind of as committed to it as each other. But I think if you're working with someone who finds it harder to organize their time or isn't maybe as quite committed, like, having that visual reminder that you're doing it every week is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, the calendar's really helpful. We just put in like when we can record, and then we match that up and then decide on when we're going to record. We don't put too much pressure on ourselves, but we're both like doing it quite often. So we do it every week. I always feel really comfortable when we have a couple of episodes sort of ready to go.
Yeah.
So that, you know, if life happens, because like life happens, then it's not like we never want to be in a place where we're going like, oh my God, like it's Tuesday and we have to record for, you know, tomorrow's release or whatever, because that's not the vibe of this podcast, you know? Other things that we use that might be helpful for people. Yeah. We use iCloud Drive to store everything. We use GarageBand. We use FaceTime. We use, it's pretty, you know, there's not like a lot involved. And again, my advice about sound would just be this: use whatever you have, right? When we started doing this podcast, I happened to have a vocal microphone. You had a live stage mic.
Oh yeah, and I sounded I had a USB mic to start off with, and I sounded much worse than you. Like if you listen to the first episodes, you sound like you're sat there in someone's ear and I'm like on the phone with you.
But that was really good though, because like editing at that point made me have to really learn about techniques that I didn't know to make the sound like kind of sort of balance, right? Because that was really important. I think our goal has always been, and we're getting to a place now, we've never wanted to be a podcast that was like, you know, some podcasts will be like, they'll talk and then they'll have, maybe in this episode we're going to do this, so this will be hilarious, but then they'll have like a sound and then it'll be the next section of talking and then a bit of like a cut and then another.
Yeah,
we've never done that.
No.
Our whole thing
we don't have a script as well. We like never had a
exactly and so editing a podcast like that's really interesting, because sometimes we might talk for like an hour and 20 minutes or something, and we know we want it to be, well, I mean, I don't know, have we talked about this, like 45 minutes is like the sort of like sweet spot. But I don't want to cut stuff out that I think is interesting or funny. But and more importantly, oftentimes I don't want to cut anything out, because the goal is we just, as we evolve and get better at doing the thing, we just hit record and we record a podcast and then we
and it's as close to the natural conversation as we can get it, because that's so the vibe. But I think, identifying what you want your vibe to be. Do you want it to be a relaxed conversation? Do you want it to be a professional script? Do you want it to be, you know, a more like slower, more planned conversation? Like that's completely up to you and what works for you.
But I do think about often what would the podcast sound like if we put some sort of a parameter which was like, no matter what, it has to be 30 minutes. You know, I could cut it down to 30, but like it would be a very different feeling. And I guess maybe advice to podcast, you know, aspiring podcasters, have a think about how long you want your thing to be. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, I do know that, you know, it really depends. For me, I think some of the podcasts that I listen to the most, they tend to be about 45 minutes long. Yeah. But having said that, some podcasts I listen to, every so often, they'll go from a 30-minute episode to a 2-hour episode. And I think the medium allows you to be as flexible as you want, because you talk for 2 hours this week, so it's a 2-hour episode. Do you want to spend a really long time trying to pick out an hour so you can condense it, when maybe you should just publish a 2-hour episode and next time try to make it a little bit shorter or whatever, you know?
Yeah. And I guess if we're probably worth mentioning like some of our specific inspirations, like my all-time favorite podcast has been My Brother and Me by the McElroy Brothers, and
I've never seen what has happened to me.
And I got
hangs at the dog park, hangs at the beach. Sorry.
Copyrighted maybe. Oh, I don't know. But yeah, like they're I think they were my biggest kind of inspiration for how I wanted this podcast to sound, because what they'll do is they have a format, but they'll go on like really long runs and really long like journeys, and those are some of my favorite bits. So I think for us, like, because we are improvising and we're bouncing off each other, it is important not to have too much of a time pressure, because you don't want to miss out on anything, because you're like, oh no, we need to leave that there. And I think having that, like, it is a time sacrifice. I mean, probably more for you than it is for me, because you have children, but it's like you want to have the freedom to be able to play, because that's how you get really memorable stuff. It comes out of nowhere, and it comes from it also comes from like a sense of trust, I think, as well. Like, and we obviously we've known each other for a while, so it's not like we're just this isn't coming out of the blue, but you have to be able to trust the person that you're sort of playing with in the space, to not shut you down, to not like judge you, to not say like, why did you say that? Like there's definitely it's definitely about like forming that good relationship, so that I'm kind of going, this is where I want to go, and you're going, yeah, let's go there. And then I think that is what you hear. Like you hear that really good sort of dynamic, and that's what people often say they like about our show as well. So that's the thing that works for us. But it you know, a lot of podcasts, it's not about that. Like I listen to some psychology podcasts, which for me, I don't want them to be all over the place. I want them to be specific because I'm there to learn. So yeah, what do you want your audience to get, and how can you create that? And then the editing process is shaping that into something that fits that original vision.
Yeah, love that. I guess, you know, sort of in summary, if you have a cool idea, great, try it, right? Don't get too concerned. My advice, don't get too concerned about like what it ultimately will be. Just go for it and give it a try, and that will give you an idea, and then stick with it and be open to evolving it. And you know, take a chance and trust that, you know, there's a reason you want to make a podcast, so just try it, right?
Yeah. And I think you know, we always used to say to each other, even if no one listens, we're still enjoying it and we're still having a good time.
For real.
So
and that was the whole point, is like, even if nobody ever listens to this podcast, did you enjoy making it? Yes, I did. Yes, was it a fun time last night talking about, you know, American Pie or whatever? Yes, it was. Well, not that movie, but like, you know, other movies, right? Yeah. Like, did we have a good time? Yes. Yeah. And you know, I mean, big picture, like I think that's the essential component of making anything. It doesn't matter what other people think. If you look back and go, I enjoyed making that and I enjoy the thing I made. Yeah. Then like, well done, human being. You made a thing with your hands and face and, you know, body and heart and mouth. You made a thing, and nobody can take that away from you. It would be neat if lots of people also like that thing, but you didn't make that thing so that other people would like it. If your goal in making a podcast is to become a famous podcaster, I don't know, man. I don't know if that's like, you know, that's like picking up a guitar and being like, I'm going to learn how to play guitar, and within a very short amount of time, I will be Bon Jovi, right? There's only one Bon Jovi. His name is John Bon Jovi. He lives in New Jersey.
And it's also like, the things that I've gotten out of doing this podcast, but maybe not the things I was expecting to get out of them, and then not connected so much to people listening and receiving the art. It's so much more connected to creating the art itself. And yes, I am calling our podcast art.
It's art.
I get it. Because there's often this internal thought process around external validation, and if I create this great thing, then people will like it and they'll like me and they'll think I'm great. That's not at all what this has been about for me. I think it's been about learning to listen to myself talking and hearing my own voice and going, yeah, that's cool, that's fine, and being less self-critical. It's been about having this really fun space to play in, where we come up with really stupid stuff every week, and we're just being inventive. Fact. It's about feeling like we've really created a space. We've really created a little world, and there are jokes that fit in that world. We talked about how we have like podcast personas that we feel like we have characters that we sometimes play, and we play up to those characters. That's and I love doing that. True. I think that's so fun. And I've also, you know, I've made a really good friend.
Oh,
so
that's
nice.
Really nice. You went and made it. You made it. You went and made it awkward.
Oh, sorry. I guess we better.
Ditto.
I guess we better move on.
Nah. Let's move on. But ditto on all that stuff. You know, it's amazing. No, actually, last thing, and then we'll move on. I also love the fact that, like, you know, for our podcast in particular, we have created a space that we like, that has like very specific, like very, very inclusive rules.
Oh,
you know? That like, we didn't sit down and be like, this is going to be our mission statement, and then, you know, these are the things that we want or whatever. But it just became a thing through our conversations, and like we have a very like, it's a safe space. You be yourself. Yeah. Right. And we have all these rules. Like one of the rules is like, you're not special. You're just some guy.
Yeah.
And then the other rule is you are special.
You are special.
You are special, right?
Yeah.
And like, it's like a comfortable blanket for it with like candles, but they're LED so they won't burn the house down, and you can just mellow out and drink a cup of tea and play with us, and you will not be judged, and we're not going to judge you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that very much.
And that No, go on. You speak.
I've also learned quite a bit from you about like, what's good and not so good in the world. I knew I had a hunch, but it's really nice to have things when I'm like, I think that's probably not a good thing. And it's validated by you going, let me get my big book of feminism out and tell you 10 different ways why that scene was actually horrible for humanity,
And like talking about like learning about yourself, like those first few episodes we did, and I started talking about social justice, and I'd listen back to it and be like, oh, this is so boring. Nobody wants to hear this. Yeah. But then over time, I really found more faith in it, and I'm like, no, this is important. It's not about me, and it's not about what I'm saying. It's about how do I want this space to be? Well, I think it should be like this. So what do I need to do to make sure it is like that? And
love it.
It's so much about who you are as a person, what makes you different, what makes you special, but also what makes you relatable and not special.
Exactly.
Be yourself, man. Just say what you need to say, speak your truth, and just get it out there.
Yeah, just like the boy with the radio from that movie, Pump Up the Volume. Take the airways, steal it, share your voice, say what you need to say, be yourself. Right? That's a reference from an episode that we did about a movie a long time ago.
I hated that movie.
Yeah, you did. Should we talk about how we how one gets a podcast into the world?
Yes. Showing your podcast to the world.
Hey, so do you know the term RSS feed, dear listener?
Yeah. If not, look it up.
You need to know that. You need to know it, because that's how you get your podcast. You don't just write an email or a letter to the Apple Podcast and say, "Dear podcast, I have a podcast here. Attached is my podcast. Can you put it on the internet?"
Somebody, please.
No, you need an RSS feed. Will you explain to people what an RSS feed is?
So an RSS feed is basically it's a feed is a updating kind of list somewhere on the internet, and so imagine it's like a page, and every time you update that page, it's then sent out to all of the other places that your podcast might be, and it updates them for you. It's like a newsletter. It's like you update your newsletter, and then all of the other places go, there's an update. What's that like? RSS feeds basically push your content through to the places you want it to go, because you have your podcast, but what you also have is your podcatchers, and podcatchers are things like Spotify, Apple Podcasts. What's some of the other ones?
Podbean,
Anchor, iHeartRadio. Yeah, there's loads of them. And you will find that people listen to podcasts on all sorts of different services, all sorts of different things. Sure. So it is a really good idea to get your podcast out onto as many different places as you can. And it might feel kind of counterintuitive, I guess, because you might think, I just want it on the best one. I don't want to have to think about the others, or, I can't track it if it's on different things. But the main thing with your podcast is, unless you're going to charge for it, it is a free thing, and free. You want it to be heard by as many people as possible. So send it out as much as you can. When you initially create your podcast, you'll need to choose a hosting service. There's lots of different hosting services, and which one you choose is very much up to you. I would say some things to consider are how easy it is to use. Like, if you're not super techy, you maybe don't want to go for one that's got a very difficult interface. Right. There's also price, so you will have to pay for your hosting service. It's usually a yearly fee, or there is sometimes monthly fees. But you obviously want to choose one that is the right kind of price point for you. There is also ownership. So some podcast providers will consider your content sort of theirs, and you want to be really careful about that, because surprise, surprise, I'm going to say this. You should always try and own your content
Yeah.
if you can. So just make sure that you're not accidentally giving away your content to a hosting service by them agreeing to kind of publish it for you. The hosting service that we use is Podbean. We do have a code with them, which is podbean.com/plot-twisters. If you use our code, you get 10% off.
10%.
And you also will find that it's a really cute little app. It's a really nice little website. I find it very easy to use. I find it very easy to. There's an app that you download and you can track, what your downloads are. I would say, as a kind of personal thing, like, don't pay too much attention to what your listening views are and subscribers are and stuff, because it can drive you a bit mad. Just put it out there and just let it go, and then check it every once in a while. Because it's so easy to obsess about stuff like that, and you don't want to be doing that.
But it is. What's cool about it is you can see where people are listening to your podcast and how many downloads and stuff, and that is pretty fun. Being a podcast formed by an American and a British person, and I have a bunch of friends and family back in the States and stuff, and we know people in England, and there's been a little bit of a fun little ooh, which country listens to us more?
Yeah.
we could tell them which country listens to us more.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Britain, isn't it?
Let's find out.
The last time I checked, I was disappointed to see that less people in America were listening. I'm from America. Come on, Mom. You said you listen to the podcast. Tell your friends already.
You should say what your mom... Hi, Anders' mom. You should say what your mom said.
Oh, and she said, I've seen your podcast. Yeah, I've watched that. I've seen your podcast. I've seen a couple of episodes of your podcast. Have you, Mom? Have you really? Can you see a podcast? I don't want to be that guy, but I am that guy. You've not seen my podcast, because my podcast is not a seeable thing. You can't see my podcast. All of that stuff, I remember when we started the pod and we were ready to publish, it was a bit of a minefield, and trying to figure out who to choose, what's the process, what's an RSS feed. I remember, you and your partner were doing a bunch of coding and stuff and just trying to get stuff onto the internet. And I was just I don't know how to do that stuff.
Yeah.
And it felt like it really was. It's so much more complicated than you would think. Making a podcast is easy. Publishing a podcast is weirdly difficult.
Yeah.
If you don't know what you're doing.
And there's lots of information out there on how to do it, but it's not super clear. So I would say the key thing is make sure you've got your content in a good format. I would recommend using an MP3 format, because that's the most compatible. There will be some services which will allow others, but if you get it in MP3, you'll get it on everything. So do that. Go to your hosting service, and your hosting service will essentially offer to send it to specific podcatchers for you. So tick as many of those as you can.
Why not?
Once it's on the podcast service, once it's on the podcatcher, sometimes you will get an email saying, do you want to claim your podcast? And what this does is it allows you to see how many people have listened to your podcast on that service, and if anyone subscribed to it, and it allows you to edit information about it. But I mean, at the end of the day, think about it, whatever your service is. So ours is Podbean. I do basically all the management through Podbean, and just kind of worry about that and don't really worry too much about anything else. Apple Podcasts is slightly different. And this is important to know, because Apple Podcasts is one of the biggest podcast listening services. With Apple Podcasts, you have to set up an account with Apple Podcasts separately. You have to do that with an Apple ID. So you can create one of those with an email address if you haven't got one. And then you have to have it approved. And fun fact, it's actually manually approved. Somebody literally sits there and listens to them, which I think is so fun. And I think you should do that job. And then it takes a bit of time for it to be approved. So once it's approved, then you can manage it separately through Apple Podcasts. And also think about your upload schedule. So do you want to do it every week? If that's not achievable, do you want to do it every 2 weeks? Do you want to do it a little bit less often? And just think about how often can you create this and upload it, and then try and keep it to a regular time slot as well.
Well, and what day do you want to do it? A lot of podcasts come out on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. That's not every podcast, but they tend to come out at that point.
Yeah.
They come out in the morning, because spoiler alert, that's when people listen to podcasts. So you want your podcast to be out before people commute to work. Because it's no good publishing a podcast at 11 o'clock unless you want people to listen to it tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know, and that was definitely something I've noticed. I mean, you know, we talked about when we want the podcast to come out, and basically we just looked at like other podcasts and when do they refresh, when you know, and then we basically just copied that if memory serves.
Yeah, I think I also
on a Wednesday.
I don't know. I just was like, middle of the week sounds good.
Yeah, it's a downer. It's kind of
Yeah,
you know, it's
hump
hump day. You know, it's a bit like can't get all these reports to do. I'm really tired from the weekend, but also I can't wait for the weekend. I guess I'll listen to this podcast. Ding 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 ding. Oh, now I'm happy again.
Yeah.
Thanks, plot
Little
twisters.
midweek lift.
Branding. Yeah. How do you pick a How did we pick the branding? I feel like you sort of had an initial idea of like you had a pretty strong vision of this is an idea of what the podcast branding could look like. And you mocked up a bunch of stuff because you know how to draw things. Yeah. Which is great, by the way. Hey, if you have a podcast, make sure that the person you do the podcast with is super good at making art and drawing. That would be really helpful. Super handy.
Yeah. So I've done basically all of it myself, and I really try to think about something that would be eye-catching, something that would portray the vibe. So I went for like a VHS, and that's the templates. They were quite soft and like, you know, familiar sort of thing. And that's totally what I tried to capture. And then I've tried to do sort of similar things with some of the promotional stuff we've used on social media. I think that we both really were keen to have like a very solid brand identity, so that the podcast, neither of us are famous yet, and so we can't
that we know of.
We can't advertise it based on it being us, which a lot of podcasts do. They will say, "Oh, it's this person, and this is what they're talking about." For us,
looking at you, Conan O'Brien.
Yeah, for us, we have to sell the concept. That's first and foremost. It's always the concept. It's always the feeling. So a lot of the promotional materials that we kind of made focus a lot around that idea and nostalgia, and like, you know, I was doing things like school notebooks and stickers and like the Be Kind Rewind sticker thing. So it's very much capturing the spirit of our podcast. As you said, we are lucky in that I happen to have that skills. I use I have an iPad and I use Procreate on an iPad, and I've also used Canva, which is a fantastic free app for graphic design. There is loads of free sort of materials out there that you can find, like free assets online. If you search for free graphic design assets that are royalty free, that's the other thing. You want to make sure you don't have any copyrighted content in your podcast artwork, because it won't get accepted by a lot of platforms. So you can have a go at creating your own stuff. Have a look online as well for podcast artwork requirements. There are some quite specific requirements, like for example, it has to be 3000 by 3000 pixels. It has to be a JPEG or a PNG, stuff like that. Apple has a pretty good list of things that it needs to be, so you can find all of that stuff out. And then in terms of your images, what I would recommend is very much try a bunch of stuff, show people, see what they think, and then whatever feels right, go with that. You can always change it later if you need to. But also, you know, if you want to, pay an artist to do it for you. There's loads of amazing artists out there who will, I'm sure, happily make something for you if you pay them a reasonable price, because then you'll have something that you feel really proud of. And it's such a big association. I think the artwork with the podcast content, like having the right thing is really important. So definitely do that if you feel you need to. We also do a lot of our promotion on social media. As of yet, I haven't really like paid for any promotion, but I think that might maybe be in the future for us, because we would like to expand a bit more. And there's so many ways that you can pay for promotion on social media, which I probably don't need to tell you about because I'm sure there's so much content out there. But a big part of it has been through Instagram and Facebook. A lot of that has been connecting with people that we already know, and then they kind of tell their friends, and then they tell their friends, and then every now and again we'll get somebody who pops out of the cracks and says, hey, I listened to it and I love it. And they have usually found out about it through a friend of a friend who found out about it on social media or whatever. So just getting it out there is so important, and making sure it's somewhat consistent. It's much more important than it looking amazing, I think.
I agree.
Familiarity is so important with stuff like this. In terms of promoting social media as well, if you want to, you can have a look at our Instagram. It's at Plot Twisters Pod, and it's same on Facebook. You can kind of see the stuff that we're talking about to get an idea of how to do it well.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I was not expecting, but I instantly sort of understood and sort of felt about is this thing where it's like you start a social media, like whatever, an Instagram account for your podcast, and then you start following a couple of podcasts that you like or that are similar to like the vibe. That's what we've done. Like we've interacted with other podcasts that are in the same sort of world. But then like you get a lot of messages from podcasts being like, hey, if you like my podcast, then I'll like your podcast. And, like a lot of this whole like people trying to drum up business by just being like, I'll scratch your back and you scratch my back, and that whole thing. And it just feels really gross. And also it feels like it's going to go nowhere, frankly, right?
Yeah.
Just make a good podcast and share it. What I think has worked quite well is finding genuinely like-minded podcasts or people and following them and commenting on their content. And if they like your stuff, they'll promote your stuff. But it has to be real, I think, versus forced, sharing, right?
Yeah, although I would say that like it's a very oversaturated market now. Like loads of people are getting into podcasts now. You will find that there are there's probably similar. We had somebody who made the same thing as ours, didn't we? Somebody literally made the same title, the same concept as ours. For a bit.
Come on.
So you will find, you'll find that there's like crossovers, and there's so much out there, and it is very difficult to stand out. So, and like I said, the way you can stand out is by having a very strong brand and concept, and by keeping it consistent and kind of keeping up with people's expectations of your stuff. But it takes a long time. Like it's a long road if you want to be successful. So don't do it because of that. Do it because you love it.
Yeah, man. To quote School of Rock, it's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll.
Oh yeah.
And other songs, right? The one about the rent that was way past due. You just gotta love doing it. I think that we said it already, but we decided early on we want to do this podcast because we like doing it. If it becomes popular, awesome. But if it doesn't, we're gonna still make it because we like making it. And some of the best. It's so exciting. Not that you do it for it, but it's really exciting when somebody organically discovers the podcast and writes a review or sends you a message saying, I found your podcast and it's really neat. I like it.
Yeah.
Ooh la la. You could bottle that and just sell it. It's better than Red Bull. We keep it going forever.
My favorite is somebody quoted our podcast to us in real life, a joke or something, like a reference. And they were like, that was great. Remember that? And it was like they were talking about it as if they were there and as if they were included. And that's so much a big part of it for me, is I want people who listen to our podcast to feel like they're in on the joke and to feel like they're part of it and to feel like, they can get involved with all of our nonsense.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I love it. I'm just glad that after years of saying, let's make a podcast, we finally decided to make a podcast.
Absolutely. I mean,
and that way people get to know my really important views on stuff like movies. Finally people have the ability to hear the words that I've been dying to say for years about.
Yeah, because what we haven't shared is that you used to do a podcast on your own in your room which no one,
Yep.
which you didn't record, but you just
Nope, didn't
spoke
record
to
it.
yourself. Yeah.
I just sat in the corner and just spouted my views and just got angrier and angrier and older and just frankly more absurd. Why is nobody listening to me? Now I have a podcast. I forgot I had to plug it in.
No, but I
that
do
microphone
think to some extent we were sort of doing the podcast before we started doing the podcast.
Oh,
But just
100%.
like in our
Oh,
conversations,
100%.
we'd all that's it. That's all you need to know. We just had conversations and then we started recording them, and that's it. No, do the thing you love. Find the thing you love. I know that can be hard, but if you're doing the thing that you love, it's so much better and it's so much more fulfilling. So
Yeah.
wait for the right thing to come along, and once you've got it, go for it. That is my advice to you.
Perfect. That's perfect. And you know, if you have a creative friend who knows how to use computers, and you can do the podcast with them, it'll make it even easier.
Yeah, just both be really like talented and funny and hilarious, and
Exactly,
so good.
Hilarious. Oh my gosh.
I really want to end this on an uplifting note. You can do it. You can do it. I believe in you.
For real though, no, for real, you can do it. If you want to make a podcast, flip and make a podcast.
And if you have any
It's
further questions, like contact us, and we're very nice people. We'll help you out.
Send us an email or DM us on the social medias, right? One of us is going to be free probably, and then we'll be like, we'll answer your question. That's the other thing, right? Like, find people who can ask questions of like, what do you think? How do you do this? Practically, what's the next step? Or like what we did when we made the podcast for the first couple of episodes. We made a bunch of episodes before we released them, and we shared them with friends of ours.
Yeah.
Who we trusted their opinions and said, look, what do you think? Because the thing is, sometimes you need another perspective, because it's very hard when it's brand new. It's very hard to see it objectively. And that was really helpful. But like the most helpful thing was just us going, I guess we'll just do it, and hitting record and just going for it. And I'm so glad that we did, because if we hadn't done that, then we wouldn't have watched almost 100 movies together and spent hours and hours and hours of absolute joy, genuinely like lovely, joyful evenings, talking nonsense about some dumb movies.
Yeah.
And riffing on new. We've come up with almost 100 legitimate good ideas for movies.
I know.
Do you know what I mean? Like, we should be famous and also rich.
Yeah.
Hollywood should be giving us money.
We're gonna make big bucks one day.
Seen the garbage they get? Yeah, exactly. Because they keep pumping out garbage, and we're giving them amazing content that nobody's listening to, Hollywood-wise,
And you could do that too. You too could be talking about the thing that you're really crazy about, recording it, and just giving away fantastic ideas for free. Because that is the world of podcasting. We'll get back to you in the future about with another episode on how to monetize your content, because that's our next adventure for you and me.
And if you have listeners out there, you know how we can make a bit of a little cash making these podcasts. Don't hesitate to DM us. You know what I'm saying? That'd be nice. But seriously though, do message us if you have any questions.
Yeah.
That would be really neat. We'd love to help you. And also, thanks for listening to the podcast. And also, thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast, to be honest.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Plot Twisters, where we didn't even talk about any movies.
I know, and I said, like, I kept saying, like, we would do it even if people didn't listen, but people do listen, and it's so cool. We've had loads of people from all over the world listen to our podcast, and that's so cool, and I love it, and thank you. And we are very excited to move on to our third season, which will be coming very soon, where we will expand into a wonderful world called the 2000s.
Whoa, the naughties!
The naughties.
I am genuinely terrified to watch things like High School Musical and which is the one with all the werewolves. The one werewolf.
Twilight.
And the Twilight.
Yeah.
Never
It's
seen
going to
it.
be a big day.
Really worried. I'm really worried that I'm going to love it.
Yeah.
That's the thing. My biggest fear is that I will love Twilight and I won't know what to do with myself.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Here's the thing, though. How cool is it that as part of doing this podcast, we've both found things we really like that we probably would have never known about before. Like, remember when we both discovered we like horror films?
I know.
That was
and
such
then
a
we
good
went and saw that new,
day.
and then we went and saw that new Scream together because of it.
Yeah. Remember that whole
everybody-
week where I listened to disco music for a whole week because I discovered it because of one of the movies? So I hope that's helped. I hope we've been able to help you. A part of our vibe is sharing our knowledge, helping people to create, helping to remove some of the blockers that can stop you from creating. And also, you know, the world is kind of rubbish a lot of the time. Life is
Big time.
difficult. We want to bring joy to your lives. We want to make things fun. We want to make you laugh. We want to make you smile. We want to talk about silly movies from the past and, you know, create that nice fuzzy space for you to come and feel better in, because things are hard and you know, sometimes people find it difficult to cope. Sometimes people feel lonely. We want to do whatever we can to help you feel better and feel invited and feel, you know, good.
Welcome. Yeah.
So we hope we've been able to do that. And so as the VHS of time rolls over the landscape of improvised comedy, that brings us to this.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Plot Twisters.
Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts if you have the time.
We'll see you next time.
Bye. 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 Bye.
I hate it when you do that.
I know.
It's such a jarring listen.